I'm sorry, but according to this will, everything goes to Kyle." The room went silent. You could have heard my dad's old wall clock ticking in the hallway. My father had been in a coma for 2 weeks, tubes in his nose, IVs in his arms, and while we sat in that hospital room, praying he'd wake up, Kyle, his so-called favorite nephew, was at a sketchy lawyer's office forging a brand new will. The house, the land, my dad's truck, every last thing signed away to a kid who never visited unless there was beer in the fridge. Mom looked like she couldn't breathe. My sister mouthed, "What the hell?" And Kyle, he just smiled, like he'd won something. Then the lawyer raised his hand, reached into his folder, pulled out a phone. He said, "There's one more thing." He hit play, and my father's voice, weak but clear, came through the speaker. "If you're hearing this, someone tried to steal from a dying man." Kyle's face dropped, and I say, "Let's make it public." My dad wasn't a rich man, but he was the kind of man you wanted on your side. Owned his house outright. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms. Old yellow siding, porch swing that creaked when you sat in it, but it was his. Paid off with 30 years of union work, busted knuckles, and black coffee at 5 a.m. He kept his boots by the back door. Said a man's shoes should always be ready. Every Thursday he drove his beat-up Silverado to Walmart. Groceries, a new crossword book, sometimes a rotisserie chicken if it was on sale. He'd call me after just to say the usual. "You need anything? Truck's already out." He never missed a mortgage payment, even when the pipes burst in '07. He never missed a birthday, and he never missed church, unless he was on a ladder fixing somebody's roof for free. That was my dad, James L. Whitaker, reliable, quiet. Always said you could tell the measure of a man by how he takes care of things that can't talk back, his dog, his house, and his promises. So when the first lie came, it didn't even register, not right away. It started on Thanksgiving. We were carving the turkey. Dad at the head of the table, big electric knife in his hand, same one he's used since I was a kid. Kyle shows up late. No sorry, no handshake, just barges in with some new girlfriend who didn't even take off her sunglasses. Plops down at the table and says, "Hope there's dark meat." He hadn't been to a holiday in 4 years. "Glad you could make it," Dad said flat. Kyle grinned, shameless. "Had a little car trouble. Got a BMW now." Touchy things. He didn't offer to bring anything. Didn't ask about Mom's surgery, just shoveled stuff in like it was a contest and spent the rest of dinner name-dropping people he'd met at some conference in Florida. After dessert, I caught Dad folding up Kyle's paper plate and throwing it in the trash. "I thought he was in real estate," I said. Dad just nodded once, slow. "Yeah, I thought a lot of things. It got worse that Christmas. Dad got Kyle a brand-new Carhartt jacket. Nice one. Still had the tag on it. Kyle opened it, gave a tight little smirk, and said, "Cool. You got the receipt, right? Might swap for a different color." That one hit hard, because Dad wore his own Carhartt until it had holes in the elbows. He cared about that gift. I saw it in the way he picked it up at the store, running his hand over the stitching, saying, "This'll last him 10 years easy." But Kyle just tossed it onto the couch and went back to scrolling on his phone. That night, after everyone left, I stayed to help clean up. Dad was quiet, rinsing dishes in the sink, not really looking up. Then he said, "I used to carry that boy around on my shoulders." The hospital stay came sudden. He collapsed in his driveway holding a grocery bag in one hand and his keys in the other. Neighbor saw him fall, called 911. We spent hours in the ER, then the ICU. Stroke. Massive. He was breathing on his own, but he wasn't waking up. I sat there in the hospital chair, staring at the beeping machines, watching his chest rise and fall. The rhythm of it, like he was still holding on just to finish a sentence. The doctor said it could be days, could be weeks. We set up a rotation. Me, my sister Rachel, Mom. Took turns reading to him, playing his favorite gospel CDs, trimming his fingernails. Kyle came once, brought a bottle of Gatorade and left after 10 minutes, said, "I can't handle this kind of thing." And then he was just gone. Rachel found out later he'd been visiting Dad's lawyer, said he was helping with estate planning, asked about the deed to the house, even suggested Dad might want to leave it to someone who could actually maintain it. The lawyer, Jeff Morgan, called me in private. I didn't like the way he talked, he said. Felt off. When I told Rachel, she clenched her jaw and said, "You think he'd actually try something?" I didn't know. I wanted to believe he was just being a jackass, that he'd flake out like he always did. But then I got the mail. A yellow envelope, hand-delivered, no stamp, just sitting in my box like a threat. Inside was a letter from a new law office, different firm, no familiar names, stating that James Whitaker had updated his will while of sound mind and had named Kyle Whitaker as sole beneficiary of the estate. Everything, the house, the land, the truck, even the tools in the shed. Rachel's name wasn't mentioned once, neither was mine, not even Mom. I called Morgan that night, furious. He hadn't heard a word about it. "I'm going to the hospital," I told Rachel. "To talk to Dad," she asked. "To do something else," I said. "I'll let you know." Dad opened his eyes 2 days after I got that fake will. Just blinked. No big moment. No swelling music. Just a single, slow blink. Like he'd been listening the whole time and finally decided to come back. I was in the chair next to him, had my boots kicked up on the edge of the bed. He looked at me, whispered, "That nurse still mad I called her bossy?" I choked on a laugh. "She's plotting your assassination." His smile was crooked, half his face still numb. But he was back. I leaned forward. "Dad, Kyle did something." His smile dropped. Doctor said he'd need weeks of rehab, PT, speech therapy, constant rest. But he was alert, sharp. I showed him the letter. He read it twice, then said, "That boy's always been hungry for shortcuts." We didn't talk about it more that day. His blood pressure was spiking. Nurse asked me to give him some space, but he wasn't quiet for long. 2 days later, he asked for Jeff Morgan, the old family lawyer. I wheeled Dad into the hospital's little conference room. Looked like it used to be a break room. Jeff showed up with a folder under one arm, recorder in the other. "James," he said, "you sure about this?" Dad nodded. "I want it recorded and witnessed." He looked me dead in the eye. "If anything happens, you play this at the reading." Jeff set the phone down. Hit record. Dad spoke slow, but every word was clean, measured. "My name is James Lee Whitaker. If you're hearing this, someone tried to steal from a dying man." We kept that recording quiet. Dad didn't want to go public just yet. Said it wasn't time. Said Kyle had to walk himself into the trap. So we waited. Kyle didn't visit again, not once, but he did show up at the house 2 weeks later. I was pulling weeds in the front yard, trying to keep things normal, he pulled up in some rental SUV. Windows tinted so dark it looked like a tank. Popped out wearing sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. Held his phone like it was part of his hand. "Hey," he said, "need to grab some of my uncle's documents." I stood up. "What documents?" "Legal stuff. Some tax forms." "Oh, and the title to the truck, if you know where that is." I just stared at him. My hands were covered in dirt. My knees were wet from the grass. "You don't live here, Kyle." He laughed. "Come on, man. We both know where this is headed. I'm the one who's going to keep the place in shape. You don't even mow the lawn right." That did it. I stepped forward, just one step. "Leave." His smile dropped. "What?" I said, "Leave. Now, or I call the cops." He blinked, then looked past me toward the porch. "Guess you don't want to be civil," he muttered, then got in his car and peeled out, spraying gravel. The next week, Dad was transferred to a rehab center. Good place, quiet, close to home. Rachel and I rotated visits. Mom was still recovering from her surgery, so she'd FaceTime in. Dad looked better, still weak, but stronger in the eyes. "I remember what he said," Dad told me one afternoon out on the patio. I sipped coffee. "Kyle?" He nodded. "Came in with a notary. Said it was just a health directive. I couldn't move my hands, could barely talk." I felt my chest tighten. "I told him no," Dad said. "Next thing I know, he's shoving a pen between my fingers." "You're serious?" "I could feel it. The paper, the pen. He made me sign something." I stood up, paced the concrete slab. Dad's voice dropped. I couldn't stop him. A few days later, Kyle threw a barbecue. Big celebration of life party. Had it catered. Posted about it on Facebook with a photo of him and Dad from 5 years ago with the caption, "Grateful to be entrusted with his legacy." People showed up, some out of curiosity, some out of pity. We weren't invited. Rachel found out when a friend sent her a photo of Kyle giving a speech next to a big banner that said, "Whittaker Estate, New Era." It made me sick. Rachel texted him, "You're disgusting. You're not Dad's heir. You're not even family anymore." He replied with a thumbs up. Dad didn't want to press charges yet. "I want them all in the same room," he said. "Let them lie with the lights on." So we waited. Jeff Morgan called me the next week. "The fake will came through probate. It's official. They're scheduling the reading." I swallowed hard. Should I tell Dad? Jeff paused, then said, "Not yet." The day of the reading, Kyle walked into the office like he was there to collect a trophy. Wore a fitted blazer, aviator shades on the collar, looked like he was auditioning for a reality show called Entitled Nephews of America. Mom came. Rachel, too. We were all quiet. Kyle cracked open a soda and said, "Let's get this over with. I got movers lined up tomorrow." Jeff raised an eyebrow. "Movers?" Kyle just grinned. Then Jeff opened the file. Read the fake will aloud, line by line. Kyle sat there with his arms crossed like he'd earned it all. When Jeff said, "Kyle Whittaker, sole beneficiary," I saw Mom close her eyes. And then Jeff said, "There's one more item to review." Kyle sat up. Jeff reached into his folder, pulled out the phone. The phone lit up. The room went still. Jeff tapped the screen, and then we heard Dad's voice, slow and firm. "If you're hearing this, someone tried to steal from a dying man." Kyle's jaw actually dropped, like in a cartoon. I saw him glance at his soda, like maybe someone spiked it. Dad's voice kept playing. "My name is James Lee Whittaker. I did not change my will. I did not give Kyle anything. In fact, if he's in the room right now, get him out." Kyle stood up. "Wait a second. This is insane. That could be anyone." Jeff held up a signed affidavit. This was recorded in front of 2 witnesses and a hospital notary. Kyle's face went red, then pale. He looked at me like I was supposed to jump in and help him, like we were suddenly brothers again. I didn't say a word. He stormed out, slammed the door, and peeled off in that same overpriced SUV. But it wasn't over, not even close. 3 days later, I found the porch swing cut in half. Clean, straight slice through the wood. Looked like it had been taken apart with a saw, just lying there in pieces. I stood over it, stunned, like someone had killed a dog and left the body on the lawn. Dad built that swing the year I graduated high school. It was his favorite spot in the whole world. I took a picture, sent it to Rachel. She replied with one word: "Kyle." We didn't hear from him for a while. Then Rachel called me in a panic. "Someone's been trying to access Mom's medical records." I was already grabbing my keys. "Where'd you hear that?" She told me a friend at the clinic flagged it. Said someone with Kyle's last name had called twice, pretending to be her husband. "I think he's trying to build some case," she said. "Maybe to say Mom's not fit to manage anything." It made my stomach twist. The way he was poking around, grasping for anything. I drove straight to Dad's rehab center. He was in the courtyard, blanket on his lap, watching a squirrel tear into a bird feeder. When I told him, he didn't flinch. "He's trying to erase me," Dad said quietly. A week later, we had a family dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti, garlic bread, and bottled iced tea. Rachel brought a peach cobbler. Mom picked out a gospel playlist on her phone. We set the table in the dining room. Same spot where we'd had every Christmas dinner since I was 6. Dad sat at the head again, same chair, but it wasn't the same. He was quieter, slower. When I asked if he wanted seconds, he shook his head. "No appetite," he said. And then he added, "Feels like I'm eating in someone else's house." That night, I found him in the garage. He was standing by his tool chest, one hand resting on the handle. The light was off, just the moon shining through the little window. "Everything in here I earned," he said. I stood beside him. Every socket wrench, every level, every bolt, bought 'em one by one. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. He pointed at the corner. "My fishing gear's gone." I turned. The little plastic crates, the old tackle box, gone. "And that battery charger, Kyle asked about it. Said it was worth $100. I looked at the empty spot on the shelf. He whispered, "He's already taking it apart." Then the letter came, typed, formal, from Kyle's new legal team. "Notice of intent to contest testamentary capacity. In plain English, Kyle was suing, claiming Dad wasn't in his right mind when he made the voice memo, trying to drag him through court, trying to make the world believe Dad was confused, sick, not lucid. The man who poured concrete driveways in July, who raised 2 kids, stayed married 41 years, and still fixed his own water heater. That man, too far gone to say who got his stuff. Rachel was furious. "I want to burn his name off the mailbox." But Dad just sat there in his chair, rereading the letter over and over. Finally, he folded it and said, "He wants to make me disappear on paper." We got the call from Jeff Morgan the next morning. "Court's moving fast," he said. Kyle's pushing for an emergency hearing, claims he's already paying property tax on the house, and wants eviction rights. Eviction? Jeff sighed. He's asking for a sheriff's notice to be posted, says your dad's a squatter. I actually dropped the phone. That night, I sat in the living room with Dad. Mom was already in bed. Rachel had gone home. He didn't say much, just stared at the porch swing, now replaced by a cheap folding chair. After a while, he spoke. People think death is the worst thing that can happen to a man. I stayed quiet. It's not, he said. Being forgotten is worse. The notice was nailed to the door. A real eviction notice. Bright orange, legal language printed in cold, dry ink. Stuck right between the screen and the front door of the house my father built with his own hands. I found it when I came by to mow the lawn. I stood there just staring at it. Couldn't even touch it, like it would burn. Then I called Rachel. Her voice cracked when I told her. He's trying to kick Dad out of his own house, I said. No, she said. He's trying to erase him. Dad read the notice without blinking. Didn't yell. Didn't throw anything. He just walked outside, sat in that cheap folding chair on the porch, staring at the space where the swing used to hang. I stood in the doorway watching him. After a while, I said, "We can fight this. Jeff's already talking to a judge." But he cut me off, quietly, firm. "I'm tired of fighting it." I froze. "Dad, I fought in Nam. I fought for my family, for my job, for every inch of this life." His hand trembled slightly. "Now I'm fighting my own blood, over tools and floorboards." I didn't know what to say. Then he said, "Let him take it." I stepped off the porch. "No, we're not letting him win. Not like this." He turned to me, slow. "I'm not talking about surrender," he said. And then, for the first time in weeks, I saw something sharp in his eyes. "I'm talking about setting the trap." The next morning, Dad made a phone call, then another and another. By noon, the house was full. Jeff showed up with files. Rachel brought boxes from the attic. Even Mom sat at the table sorting through old receipts and photos. Dad had a list. Every item Kyle had touched. Every time he'd come onto the property, every document he tried to file, he wrote it out by hand, in shaky letters, one page at a time. "This is the record," he said. "This is the truth." We stayed up late, gathering it all. Around 11 p.m., he handed me a folder. "Make copies of everything," he said. "Keep one in the glove box, one at work, one in the freezer." I blinked. "The freezer?" He looked at me like I was new. "House fire, dumbass." The next day, Kyle showed up. Didn't knock. Just walked into the garage like he owned the place. He looked around like he was appraising it, tapped a shelf, nudged a box with his foot. Then Dad wheeled himself in from the side door. Kyle actually smirked. "Well, if it isn't the squatter." I stepped between them. "You don't belong here." Kyle ignored me, looked straight at Dad. "Just so you know, you've got 10 days to leave, then I changed the locks." Dad didn't say a word. Kyle kept going. "And if you trash anything on the way out, I'll sue. I already had the kitchen appraised. Those cabinets are worth more than your truck." Still nothing. He looked at me. "You can help him pack. Or you can get out too." Then he laughed. "Unless you want to sleep in the garage with the squirrels." That night, Dad didn't sleep. I heard the floor creak at 2 a.m. Found him in the kitchen, staring at a cup of cold coffee. His eyes were wide open. "He's not going to stop," he said. I nodded. Then he said it again, slower, darker. "He's not going to stop until we bury him." I sat down, quiet. Then Dad looked me dead in the eye. "It's time." I said nothing, but I got up, grabbed the recorder, the files, the photo from the mantel, the one of Dad holding Kyle as a baby. "We do this your way," I said. Dad gave the smallest nod I've ever seen. 2 days later, Kyle served Mom with papers. He was suing for elder exploitation, said she was emotionally manipulating a mentally compromised man into changing his will. Mom almost fainted. Rachel had to hold her up. When Dad heard, he didn't blink, just said, "Good." Then he made one last phone call to the news, local station, Channel 7, the kind that still covers county fairs and Eagle Scout ceremonies. He told the reporter, "I have a story. It's about theft and family and lies, and I have proof." The next morning, I walked into the living room and saw him sitting by the window, button-down shirt, clean shave, oxygen tank beside him. "You look like you're about to run for mayor," I joked. He didn't smile. Then he pointed at the empty space on the porch. "You remember that swing?" "Yeah. I sat on it every evening. Rain or shine, it was mine. No one gave it to me. I earned it." I nodded. He looked out the window again. "Kyle stole that swing. But now I'm going to take back the house." He turned to me. "All of it." Dad started with a list. 3 pages. Legal pad. Every bullet point in capital letters. He sat at the kitchen table, oxygen tank humming, reading glasses perched low on his nose like some dying general drawing up the last battle plan. "You really going to go through with this?" I asked. He didn't even look up. "I'm not leaving this world with that little snake holding my keys." Fair enough. First we met with Jeff Morgan. Private meeting, no phones, no emails, just ink, paper, and 2 cups of stale office coffee. Dad handed him the folder, the one with the affidavits, the hospital log, and the original will. "This the real one?" Jeff asked. Dad nodded. Jeff flipped through. "We can fight Kyle's claim, but if we want this to hurt, we need more than just paper." Dad pulled a small box from his coat pocket, set it on the desk. Jeff opened it. Inside, the pen Kyle used to force his hand. Still had the hospital ID sticker stuck to it. "Chain of custody," Dad said. "And I got a witness?" "Who?" Dad smiled. "Nurse Jenkins. Big lady. Bad attitude. She saw everything." Jeff laughed under his breath. "Oh, she'll bury him." Next, we went to the garage. I thought he just wanted to look around, maybe reminisce. Nope. He pointed to the workbench. "We're building something." I blinked. "What?" "A coffin." I almost dropped my drink. He rolled his eyes. "Not for a body, for the swing." He nodded at the pieces, the wood Kyle had cut in half. "I want it cleaned, sanded, packed in this box, and I want it sitting in the front yard the day we take back the house." I stared at him. "You want to send a message?" He nodded once. I said, "That's cold." He said, "That's justice." Rachel handled the media side. Channel 7 called back. Reporter's name was Mindy, local girl. Dad remembered her from church potlucks when she was a kid. She came by with a cameraman. Set up a mic in the living room. Dad wore his Sunday shirt, put on his old war medals. She asked him to tell his story. He said, "I worked 45 years. No scandals, no secrets. I paid my taxes. I voted in every election since '72. I've got a grandkid who thinks I'm Superman. And now my nephew says I'm too stupid to sign my own name." The cameraman swallowed hard. Mindy nodded like she'd just heard a confession. Then Dad leaned forward. "I got proof, and I got patience. Let's see how fast he runs when the light hits him." 2 days later, Kyle posted a video on Facebook. He was standing in front of the house, our house, holding the eviction notice. "Hey, everyone," he said, fake humble voice. "Just doing the hard work of protecting my family legacy. Sad how some folks can't let go." He panned the camera across the yard, zoomed in on the empty swing hooks, said, "Things are going to look a lot different around here." Rachel sent me the video. No caption, just the barf emoji. Dad watched it, silent, then said, "Good, he's given himself rope." Next move, the will reading. A redo, this time with full legal backup and a notary. We scheduled it at Jeff's office. Same place, but this time Dad would be there. I rolled him in that morning. He was calm, serious. Rachel whispered, "You sure about this?" He nodded. Time to watch him squirm. Kyle showed up in a hoodie and sunglasses, like he was avoiding the paparazzi. Walked in like he still owned the place. He froze when he saw Dad sitting at the table. "Wait, what is this?" Jeff cleared his throat. "This is a rereading of the official, notarized, and legally witnessed last will and testament of James Lee Whitaker. The actual one." Kyle laughed. "Is this a joke?" Dad looked up. Said nothing. Jeff pressed play on the recorder again. Same message. "If you're hearing this, someone tried to steal from a dying man." But then Jeff pulled out a second recording, new one. "Dad, 2 days ago." Kyle Whitaker forced my hand to a forged document. I was under medical care. I told him no. He pushed my hand anyway. And then Nurse Jenkins's statement. Kyle's face went pale. He stood up. "This is harassment. I'm calling my lawyer." Jeff smiled. "You should." Kyle stormed out, again, but not before muttering, "This isn't over." It was, because the next day the news segment aired. Channel 7, 6 p.m. slot. Veteran fights back after nephew forges will. They used footage of the porch swing, the old photos, the sound of Dad's voice on the recorder. They even showed Kyle's Facebook video. Blurred his face but kept the audio. By morning, the comment section was a war zone. People were furious, hundreds of shares, dozens of calls to Kyle's brokerage office, and then someone sent us a screenshot. Kyle's company had dropped him. "Effective immediately," it said. Dad didn't smile, but that night he asked me to bring out the porch swing box. We set it on the lawn, right under the hook where the swing used to hang. He placed a note on top. Just one sentence. "Some things can't be stolen." The first thing Dad did was buy a prepaid phone. He made me drive him to a gas station 2 towns over, said it was for optics. He picked the phone up, tapped the screen like he was testing a grenade. "Time to make noise," he said. That afternoon, he made a call to the county tax assessor's office. Pretended to be a concerned neighbor. Said the new owner of the Whitaker house was claiming residency, but hadn't lived there a single day. Asked real casual like, "Isn't that tax fraud?" Then he hung up. 10 minutes later, the assessor's office called Jeff Morgan. Apparently, if Kyle filed under false residency and claimed tax deductions on property he didn't live in, that could trigger a fraud investigation. Dad just sipped his iced tea and said, "Hope he enjoys paperwork." Next step, the fishing gear. Remember the tackle box Kyle stole? Dad still had the receipt, dated and signed. The store kept a serial number for the rod set, too. Fancy one from a Father's Day gift a few years back. Rachel tracked it to a pawn shop 30 miles out. Dad called the sheriff, reported it as stolen property. Then he told the officer, if he pawned that, he's probably sold other things. You should check the shed." 2 days later, a detective knocked on Kyle's apartment door, asked about the fishing gear. Kyle got mouthy, slammed the door. A few hours later, the detective came back with a warrant. They found Dad's missing tools in the back of Kyle's SUV, still in the cases, some still labeled. Dad's initials were carved into the wrench handles, JLW, no mistaking it. Rachel and I stood in the hallway of the rehab center when Dad got the call. He listened, didn't say much. Then he hung up and said, "Next." Kyle must have felt the pressure because suddenly he went dark. No Facebook posts, no TikToks, no texts. But we weren't done. Jeff Morgan filed an official motion to vacate the forged will, cited fraud, coercion, theft, and obstruction. Dad signed every page, took his time with the pen, wrote clean. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded once. "Feels like war again, but this time I get to pick the battlefield." The final setup came quietly. Jeff scheduled a deposition hearing for Kyle, required by the court. Kyle had to show, and Dad wanted to be there. "You sure?" I asked. He looked at me. I want him to look me in the eye when it all falls. We met at the courthouse annex. Beige walls, plastic chairs, bad fluorescent lighting. Kyle walked in 10 minutes late, wearing a wrinkled shirt and no tie. Looked like he hadn't slept. He saw Dad in the room and almost turned around. But the clerk called his name. No escape now. Jeff opened with easy questions: name, address, employment. Then, "Do you currently reside at the property in question?" Kyle hesitated. "I have access to it." That wasn't the question. He shifted in his seat. "I visit." Jeff handed the judge a printed map, GPS logs, photos. Kyle hadn't been to the property in over 6 weeks. Then came the receipts, the fishing gear, the tools, the tax forms. Piece by piece, Jeff laid it out. Kyle started to sweat. Finally, Jeff said, "Did you forge Mr. Whitaker's signature while he was unconscious in the hospital?" Kyle opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then Dad leaned forward in his wheelchair, slow, controlled, said, "Don't lie, son, not again." Kyle snapped. "I was trying to help." The room went silent. He looked around, wild-eyed. "He was going to leave it to you losers, all that land, that house. He was going to waste it." Jeff calmly replied, "So you stole it." Kyle stood up. "This is a circus," and walked out. But the cameras were waiting at the hallway. So were 2 sheriff's deputies. And that orange piece of paper he'd nailed to Dad's door? Dad brought it, held it up for the press to see, then whispered, "Your turn, Kyle." That night, we sat out on the porch, Dad in his chair, Rachel beside him, me on a milk crate. The box with the swing pieces was still sitting by the steps. He reached over and tapped the lid. "Let's rebuild it," he said. "You serious?" "I want it hung back up before the hearing." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He gave the smallest smile. "Because when we win, I want my seat back." The sheriff's cruiser pulled into Kyle's driveway at 8:12 a.m. I know because I was parked across the street, watching with a lukewarm coffee in my hand and my heart beating in my throat. Kyle came outside in pajama pants and no shoes. Looked like he hadn't brushed his teeth, just rubbing his eyes like the world was happening to him. Deputy handed him a folder, thick one. "You've been served," he said. Kyle blinked. "For what?" The deputy didn't even flinch. "Fraud, forgery, theft, attempted eviction of a legal property owner, and, bonus, lying on state tax forms." Then he turned around and got back in his cruiser. Kyle just stood there, mouth half open. Didn't even notice the neighbor snapping a photo from her porch. Meanwhile, back at Dad's house, we were busy. Rachel was in the kitchen with Mom, boxing up Kyle's leftover mail, junk, and decoration attempts, which included a neon beer sign and 2 framed motivational quotes that said things like, "Earn your empire." I was out back, clearing out the shed. Found more missing tools. Some still had price tags. The idiot didn't even try to hide them. Dad sat in the folding chair out front, watching it all with narrowed eyes and folded arms. "I want him to see it," he said. "See what?" He looked at the spot where the porch swing used to hang. "See what it looks like when we take it all back." 2 hours later, Kyle pulled into the driveway. He stopped the car halfway, just sat there behind the wheel. Then finally got out. Walked slow, stiff, looked around, like he was the one being robbed. He saw the trash bags by the curb, the empty beer sign, the swing box, and Dad, right there on the porch. "Calm as you like." Kyle's voice cracked. "You can't just throw me out." Rachel stepped out of the house, holding his box of mail. "You mean like you tried to do to him?" "That wasn't personal. You nailed an eviction notice to the door." Kyle's voice turned hard. "You think this is over? You think a few deputies and some local news report scares me?" Dad finally spoke. "No," he said, "but losing everything might." Kyle turned to him. "You're bluffing." Dad held up a piece of paper, just one. Kyle flinched like it was a knife. "Court date's set," Dad said. 2 weeks. Judge already saw the video, saw the tax fraud, saw the pawn receipts. Kyle's face turned red. "You set me up." Dad tilted his head. "You set yourself up. I just made sure someone was watching." Kyle didn't respond, just stormed back to his car, slammed the door, and saw the boot on his back tire. Rachel waved from the lawn. "Courtesy of the county," she said. "You owe 3 months in back taxes." Later that night, the phone rang. It was Kyle's lawyer. Well, former lawyer, said Kyle had lied about everything, falsified documents, dragged the firm into a mess they wanted no part of. "He's on his own," the guy said, "and frankly, we hope he gets buried." I hung up and walked outside. Dad was on the porch, staring at the stars. "Guess the lawyer's out," I said. He nodded. "Good, one less shield." The next morning, Channel 7 ran a follow-up, this time with Dad on camera. He sat on the porch, the new swing hanging behind him. They aired footage from the court, the deposition, even showed Kyle storming out. Then Dad said something that made Rachel tear up on the spot. "You can lose your strength, you can lose your health, but when someone tries to take your name, that's when you fight." The phone rang all day. Old neighbors, church friends, even some of Dad's old crew from the Union Hall. One of them left a voicemail that just said, "You made us proud, James." He listened to that one 3 times, didn't say anything, just nodded. Then he told me, "It's time for the last piece." "What piece?" He smiled. "The one that hurts." 3 days before the court hearing, Jeff filed one final motion. It wasn't financial, it wasn't criminal, it was personal. A petition to officially strip Kyle of the Whitaker family name in all estate matters. No recognition, no inheritance, not even as a distant heir. It included a cease and desist for any use of Dad's name, likeness, or military service in future posts or appearances. Kyle would be erased from every document Dad had ever signed. His birth certificate would still say Whitaker, but legally, he'd be nobody. We were in the garage when the papers were signed. Dad rested his hand on the bench, took his time. "This is revenge?" I asked. No, he said. Then he tapped the wooden swing box. This is restoration. The morning of the hearing, Kyle showed up late, wearing a suit 2 sizes too big, hair half gelled like he got dressed in a panic. His eyes were bloodshot, hands shaking. No lawyer next to him. Jeff leaned over to Dad and whispered, "He's flying solo." Dad didn't smile, just nodded once. Then he said, "Let's finish this." Inside the courtroom, it felt like air had weight. Small room, peeling ceiling tiles, that weird hum from the fluorescent lights, but the silence, heavy. Judge was a sharp woman in her 60s, glasses down her nose, stack of documents already in front of her. She cleared her throat. "We are here today to determine the validity of the will of James Lee Whitaker and whether criminal fraud was committed by Mr. Kyle Whitaker." Kyle stood, tried to speak. "I'd just like to say—" Judge held up a hand. "Sit down." He sat, hard. Jeff opened with the original will, signed, witnessed, dated years ago, still valid. Then came the hospital records, nurses' statements. The video of Dad in the rehab center, clearly of sound mind, naming Rachel and me. Then the audio file. Dad's voice again, clear and firm. "If you're hearing this, someone tried to steal from a dying man." Kyle's legs started bouncing under the table. Rachel leaned forward and whispered to me, "He's sweating through his shirt." Then the real fun started. Jeff handed the judge a folder, said, "Your Honor, included are property tax filings under false pretenses, multiple pawn receipts for items reported stolen, and video evidence of Mr. Kyle Whitaker attempting to remove items from the property after being warned." The judge flipped through the folder slowly. Kyle was breathing hard now, tapping his fingers on the table, looking for an exit that didn't exist. Then the judge spoke. "Mr. Whitaker, Kyle, do you have any legal representation today?" He stood. "I had a lawyer, but he dropped me. He didn't understand the family context." She cut him off. "Do you deny forging the second will?" He paused. Long. "I thought he wanted me to have it." "You thought?" "I mean, he said he was confused. He didn't say no." A beat. Then Dad spoke. "I did say no." Everyone turned. He was standing, holding on to the edge of the bench, shaky, but on his feet. "I said no," he repeated. "I said it with my mouth, with my eyes, with the strength I had left, and you didn't care." Kyle looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Dad kept going. "You saw a sick old man and thought it was your chance. You looked at the house, the land, the truck, and you thought, easy win." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "You weren't family. You were a thief with my last name." The judge leaned back, folded her hands. "In 25 years, I've never seen something so shameless." She tapped the folder with one finger. "All criminal charges are being passed to the district attorney's office for review. Effective immediately, the forged will is null. James Lee Whitaker's original estate plan is reinstated in full." Kyle opened his mouth. "I object." "You can object in jail," she said flatly. "Take him." The deputies moved fast. Kyle tried to step back, arms raised. Wait, this is a misunderstanding. I was going to give it back." They cuffed him in seconds. Rachel stood. So did I. He looked right at Dad as they walked him past. "You ruined my life," he hissed. Dad didn't even blink. "No," he said. "You did." Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting again. Same Channel 7 team, same microphone. But this time, Dad stepped into the spotlight on his own. They asked what he wanted to say. He looked right into the camera and said, He tried to write me out of my life, but I wrote him out of my will. That night, we sat on the porch, cool breeze, porch swing creaking softly. Rachel passed Dad a glass of lemonade. I handed him the signed court order. He held it for a long time, then said, "He nailed a piece of paper to my door, so I nailed one back." 2 days later, Kyle's car was repossessed. His apartment lease was revoked for criminal fraud under review. He'd lost his job, his lawyer, and now his freedom. But the real blow? A public notice ran in the county register. It listed all known aliases and associations for Kyle Whitaker. And at the bottom it read, "Removed from all claims to the Whitaker estate. Not recognized as legal family under existing will." Per court ruling, Rachel framed a copy and hung it in the living room. Mom called it tacky. Dad called it correct. I found him outside later that evening, alone, just sitting on the swing. The light was soft, the air still. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, didn't speak. I sat next to him, and for a long time we just listened to the sound of the chains, creaking back and forth. Finally, he whispered, "It's done." And then he smiled. The day after the hearing, Kyle's mom, Dad's sister, called the house. Rachel picked up, said nothing for a full minute, just held the phone, jaw clenched. Then she passed it to Dad. James, his sister, said, "He's your blood." Dad didn't flinch. He was. He made mistakes. But prison? You're really going to let him rot over a house? He looked out the window, porch swing drifting side to side in the breeze. "It wasn't just a house," he said. "It was me." She started to cry. He hung up. A week later, we got a letter from Kyle, handwritten, sloppy, mostly excuses. One line stood out. "I was just trying to get ahead." Dad read it once, then folded it, placed it under his coffee mug, and never mentioned it again. Thanksgiving came. No Kyle, no extra plates, just the four of us around the table. Turkey, stuffing, and a new bottle of wine Rachel brought. She said we earned it. The porch swing creaked outside. Dad's seat was back where it belonged. We didn't say his name once, but everyone was thinking the same thing. He thought he'd get away with it. He thought we'd roll over. He thought we'd forget. Later that night, I found Dad out front, sitting in the swing. The night was quiet, cold. He nodded toward the spot where Kyle had nailed the eviction notice. "Funny thing," he said. "What's that?" He leaned back, hands folded. "He came for my house, my tools, my name." He looked up at the stars. But the only thing he ever really wanted was this chair. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. We never replaced the cut swing. Dad had me repair it, piece by piece. The cracks are still there, glued, sanded, sealed. You can't sit in it without feeling the seams. But that's the point. It creaks louder now, like it remembers. A few months later, Rachel framed the eviction notice, hung it above the garage. Some call it bitter. Dad calls it a receipt. The phone rang once more. Unknown number, then silence. We never found out who it was. Didn't really matter. Dad stopped sitting out there every day. But when he did, he always took his time. Swinging, quiet, watching the world go by like it owed him something. I asked him once if he'd ever forgive Kyle. He looked at me, long pause, then said, "I forgave him the second I erased him."